Hi everyone. I've always cared about the planet. You have to excuse me. I was going to start again. I've always cared about the planet. As a teenager with crimped gothic hair, I used Vidal Sassoon hairspray, not because it was fashionable, but because it came in a non-aerosol pump. And I didn't think that my need to backcomb should be affecting the ozone layer. I was a vegetarian long before there were meat-free aisles in the supermarket, and corn was just a humble mushroom. And long before sustainability was a kind of key term, I was buying second-hand clothes, not for the planet, but because I loved the history and the stories they represented. Now, looking back, I realised something. I wasn't ahead of a trend. I was building a value system. Now, that value system followed me into a career in television. I worked my way up through the broadcasting industry. I was a producer and then a production manager. Now, production managers are the people who take ideas and they make them real. We turn kind of half-baked scripts and briefs into a TV show that you can watch at home. We handle the budgets, we build the schedules, and we solve the problems that nobody else sees behind the scenes. And a big part of that work is paperwork, which I know doesn't sound particularly glamorous, but bear with me. I think it's actually the most important part. Because paperwork is the skeleton of a TV production, the planning. Without it, the whole thing just collapses into chaos. If you think about your own body, without the skeleton, it's just a pile of goo on the floor, isn't it? So production managers are fundamentally the life support system of any TV show. And here's the thing that most people probably don't consider. Every one of those production decisions that production managers make, every location they book, every journey they plan, every resource used has an impact. Not just on the finished TV show, but on the world around it. But the industry that I entered when I started wasn't necessarily built for people like me. Working in television in the early noughties, it was fairly savage for women. There was kind of ladette culture, unchecked male privilege, and long, relentless work hours that were worn like a kind of badge of honour. And as a young working class woman, I had to really fight to stay in the room. But I did stay, and I built a career. Working at the BBC, at Sony, at ITV. And I was really proud of my role as a production manager, even if the rest of the industry didn't always seem like they shared that pride. Because something that's often not spoken about is how in television, those people who make the production decisions that help craft content are often less valued than those who direct it and shape the editorial vision. And while I'm here to talk about sustainability in television production, we can't separate it out from the wider picture. From gender pay gaps, inequality, and a lack of recognition for a largely female-led, driven part of the industry. These issues are not separate. So the role of the production manager has traditionally been held by women. And despite holding an enormous amount of responsibility, it's rarely been seen as creative. And it's paid much lower rates than other production disciplines, such as directors and writers and producers. Now, production managers, as I've explained, they're kind of in the centre of everything. We balance the practical, the financial, the legal, all while supporting the creative vision. We're the ones who make ideas possible, but for a long time, we weren't even recognised as a craft. Until 2021, production managers couldn't be entered for a BAFTA. And even when that changed, production managers were still missing from the story. There was a trailer to promote the 2022 BAFTAs called Behind Every BAFTA. It was a great trailer. It showed all the roles that were working, making films and TV behind the scenes. All but one were featured. Can you guess which one it was? It was the production manager. And this sparked a response. It sparked a campaign called Production is Broken, because some people in the industry recognised that this was a problem. There was something wrong with the fact that the work that was holding everything together was being overlooked, undervalued, and underpaid. And this matters because when we undervalue production, when we undervalue this work that's predominantly done by women, we undervalue the very place where decisions are made. These are decisions about resources, about people, and all these things that impact sustainability. But back to me, back to my story. I was a fully paid up member of the production industries, underpaid, underrested, overworked, but still convincing myself that the creative output was worth it. And then this happened. I became a mother, and suddenly everything changed. Because suddenly the world wasn't abstract anymore. It was hers. And I found myself asking some questions that I hadn't asked before. What kind of industry was I part of? And what kind of future was I helping to create with the work I was doing? And I realised something uncomfortable. I could no longer separate my personal values from my practical work, from my professional practice. I could no longer ignore that the industry that I loved, that I'd worked so hard to stay in, was built on systems that were just unsustainable. Not just environmentally, but socially too. So I made a shift. I became what's known as a pracademic. This is someone who bridges industry and academia. So in simple terms, I didn't leave the industry, I brought it into the classroom. I thought that I could help elevate the role of the production manager so it was well respected, well rewarded, and in line with the modern world. But after a couple of years of teaching, I had a really difficult realisation. I was teaching production exactly as I had learnt it myself. Efficient, business-led, fast-paced, but not thoughtful and absolutely not sustainable. I wasn't producing change, I was just reproducing the existing problems. And the scale of that problem is really huge, particularly when we think about the environment and the screen industries. So the UK screen industries produces approximately about 175,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions a year. That's the equivalent of the same emissions of around 40,000 people. Just 1 hour of television produces around 50 tonnes of carbon. Now, 50 tonnes might feel like quite an abstract figure, but to put it into some kind of perspective, that's 4 return flights from the UK to New York. Or, to personalise it even more, it's the equivalent of one person's carbon emissions for an entire year. So that episode of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, you all watched the other night, with Gemma Collins crying, that used almost as much carbon as you did an entire year of your existence. And we think that's normal. So I then started to ask a different question. Not how can I teach students to make productions efficiently, but how do we make it more human? What if sustainability wasn't just an add-on, but it was actually the starting point? What if we led not just with budgets, but with values? I came up with this idea of heart-led production. So I became one of the first educational trainers for BAFTA Elbert. So BAFTA Elbert, the Elbert Initiative, it was originally developed by the BBC, and it was then gifted to BAFTA so that they could then distribute it amongst educators and production houses. And what it does, it allows people who are making film and television to track the carbon impact of what they're doing and make better choices from script to screen. And through this work, I began to think maybe there's a different way that I can teach production as well, in addition to this. So this led to the creation of my own initiative, which I called Reflective Reels, the name a little nod to the film and TV industries. And this is a toolkit that I use to train apprentice production managers, and it encourages them to think about the social and environmental impact of what they create. Now, what makes the Reflective Reels initiative different? It isn't just a one-stop opportunity. It's not just one workshop. It's not just gaining one certificate. It's a way of getting them to think about production from every angle. And I approach it as a kind of three-pronged approach. First of all, I expose students to really powerful stories, watching documentaries that help them feel the urgency of the climate crisis. And then they apply that thinking in practice, working on scenarios, looking at real production decisions such as budgets, schedules, logistics. How can they put that work into practice? And finally, they reflect. They think about what they've made and what impact that might have had. And that reflection is where the real shift happens. Because suddenly, sustainability isn't just an abstract concept to them. It's something that they've got some agency over, that they can make a change with the work that they're hoping to do. And when you bring those three elements together, story, practice and reflection, you're not just teaching skills, you're creating a different kind of production manager. This matters because production isn't just technical, it's deeply human. Television is not just made alone. Television is all about collaboration. People get together to make TV and they share skills. And there's a concept by the theorist Etienne Wenger which really kind of speaks to this. It's called communities of practice. And what Wenger says is, when we get together to work on something that we really care about, we don't just share skills, we shape each other as well. We don't just learn how to do the job, we learn how to be the job. And this is exactly what happens in TV. When crews get together, there's kind of a form of tribalism that happens. Values are passed on, behaviours are reinforced, and the next generation learn how to make television just like their predecessors. And I think that that's actually where the opportunity lies, because if we can get people to change what that community values, if we place sustainability, care and responsibility at the centre of it, we don't just change how we make productions, we change the culture of the industry itself. And that's quite exciting. Now, the environment where this training happens matters as well. There's a concept by Michel Foucault which really helped me understand this. He talks about heterotopias. Now, heterotopias are spaces that exist both outside and inside the real world. So a museum's a heterotopia, a park is a heterotopia. And they're places where cruise ships are heterotopias. They're places where the usual rules of society are reflected, but they're also slightly disrupted. This could almost be a heterotopia. For me, the television studio is exactly this kind of space. Yes, on the one hand, it mirrors industry. It's got all those kind of pressures, the deadlines, the hierarchies. But on the other hand, it's a place where rules can be questioned, they can be reimagined, even rewritten. And this is where the Reflective Reels project really kind of came in its own. Because students don't just learn how to fit into the industry, they begin to ask, well, what kind of industry do I actually want to be part of? And what kind of impact do I want my work to have? And in that way, the studio becomes not just a place for training, it becomes a space for possibility. And when you shift values, things really begin to change. So through the Reflective Reels toolkit, students don't just learn how to make television, they learn how to make television sustainably. They gain their BAFTA Robot certification, they rethink schedules, budgets, logistics, but all through this lens of sustainability. And something incredible happens. They don't feel restricted by it, they feel creative. Because constraints, when guided by purpose, don't limit imagination, they focus it. I saw this really clearly when I was co-producing a documentary over the last 3 years called Woman Grows Jeans. It wasn't just a documentary, it was a question. Could we make a pair of jeans in the UK from soil to stitch. That's exactly what Justine Elderslie Williams was trying to do. She'd spent 5 years trying to do exactly that. So she grew flax, she harvested indigo, she learnt to weave, to spin, to sew. She was rebuilding a process that globalisation had all but eliminated. And what struck me as I worked more on this project wasn't just the jeans, which miraculously were created, and there was a bit of jeopardy at the beginning about whether we would even be able to do this, and they were beautiful. It was the actual process itself, people coming together deliberately, responsibly, to create something slowly that they cared about. And we realised something really important. If we were telling a story about sustainability, we couldn't make it in an unsustainable way. So we approached the filmmaking differently. We decided to choose a bricoleur approach. Now, a bricoleur is a craftsperson, it's from the French word bricoleur, who uses everything that they can find as a resource. So we did exactly that. We used local resources, we adapted as the story unfolded, we responded to the kind of rhythms of the process, not the other way around. And what happened was we created a film that wasn't just about sustainability, it was a film that practiced it. Because when you work this way, you're not just documenting a story, you're becoming part of it. Now, the film has been a great success. It has won awards, it won the Paris Documentary Award, it's been screened across the UK in partnership with the UK Green Screen Alliance. And it's been really interesting. This story, which was actually made predominantly by mobile phone footage that was captured by volunteers, iPad footage by craftspeople, and a very small 3-person crew, has actually captured audiences' imagination with its story-led authenticity. And that is kind of at the heart of my talk. Television doesn't just reflect the world, it also helps create it. Every decision behind the scenes doesn't just shape the carbon emissions, it also helps shape imagination. The future of film and television doesn't just depend on better stories, it depends on better ways of making them. Sustainability, as I've already said, is not a creative constraint, it's actually a creative force. And if we embrace it, not at the margins, but in the centre, we don't just reduce harm, we also expand possibility. Thank you.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much.